The DragonSword Awakening devs recently did an almost 8-hour livestream, and they also revealed an insane amount of information during it. With this, we have the release window for the next 4 playable characters, confirmation that these characters are also going to be free, and even new details like new endgame content, a massive farming buff, upcoming story expansions, new costumes, English dubbing, a possible PlayStation version, their stance on mods, and even some really interesting comments about defense ignore and the current gear meta. So instead of making you sit through almost 8 hours of a Korean livestream, I went through the entire thing and pulled out everything you actually need to know. Before we get into it though, everything in this video comes from the official Korean developer livestream, but because the stream was entirely in Korean, there may be some slight translation mistakes or nuances that were lost. As a result, I did try my best to cross-check every point as carefully as possible, but if an official English announcement later contradicts anything here, follow the official English wording, as again, I apologize. With this out of the way though, let's start with how the game has actually been performing and what's coming soon. Now before getting into the updates, the devs actually gave us some numbers about how well DragonSword is doing. The game has passed 1 million wish lists, and more importantly, it sold over 300,000 copies. Apparently 300,000 was their internal sales target for the first month, but they managed to pass that in only around 2 weeks. They also said that DragonSword is now being played in over 100 different countries, with the US and China being their biggest markets so far. Later in the stream though, they also revealed that just over 40 people are currently working on the game, which puts some of these slower update timelines we're going to talk about later into perspective. The fact that a team that small shipped a game of this size is honestly pretty insane in my opinion, but let's actually move now to some of the changes that they described. To start, one of the biggest immediate changes is a massive farming buff. The devs said that rewards from both regular and specialized dungeons are planned to increase by about 2 or 2.5 times their current amount. Gathering is also getting buffed, with the amount that you receive from gathered materials planning to be increased by more than double in the upcoming changes. Dungeon clears are also being sped up though. Instead of killing a boss, waiting for a treasure chest, and then opening it, the reward screen will appear directly after the boss dies. Hunts are also now having the delay after the enemy dies shortened, and surprise missions and world bosses are also being changed to a 2-hour spawn cycle, so you won't be locked into the old daily timing. Gold income is also being improved too, and more importantly, they've stated that raids are planned to start giving gold. The rewards from the gold dungeons should increase by about 2 to 2.5 times, and gold income from other dungeons is also being increased too. So if you felt that progression has felt way too grindy, this is probably the single biggest short-term change from the stream. But while these changes make the grind faster, there is one world boss detail worth separating from the rest of the endgame discussion. To start though, there is one thing that I want to clarify about world bosses. From what the developers said in the Korean livestream, they currently don't seem to be planning a difficulty increase for the existing world bosses. They acknowledge that highly geared characters can kill them pretty quickly, but their comments suggested that world bosses are not meant to be the main content that pushes your account. Instead, the harder content focus seems to be going towards hunts, raids, the Tower of Trials, and the new challenge content that we'll be talking about momentarily. Now, on the topic of hard endgame content, if you've been farming Ursula, there's actually a pretty major change coming from the stream. The devs said that the raid is too long and want to reduce its overall length to roughly half of what it is right now. Their current plan is essentially 1 human form fight and 1 dragon form fight from said raid, and the unnecessary wind travel sections are being removed, the cutscenes are being shortened, and some of the extra combat between the important parts is also being reduced too. They've also mentioned that Ursula isn't currently planned as a playable character because she was obviously designed specifically as a boss, but the next stretch of updates is heavily focused on quality of life. More specifically, they're working on letting you delete certain unnecessary item types, specifically things like food, cooking materials, and runes, but they don't want to make every item freely deletable because accidentally deleting valuable equipment or items would obviously be awful. Food slots are also on their list to improve, team preset slots are being increased from 5 to 7, and multiplayer matchmaking and lobby issues are still being worked on as we speak, including cases where the difficulty can't be changed properly in the lobby. Astria's projectile targeting has also received an initial improvement, but their general plan for the next month is basically to keep removing the things that make the game unnecessarily inconvenient. Now let's talk about the new characters. The first is Ryza. The original target was the end of September for this character, but the devs said that the current release target is instead around the 2nd week of October, which puts her roughly 2 weeks later than the initial plan. They explained that while they were working on her, they found parts that still weren't finished, so they do need a little more time before releasing her. As for the character herself, Ryza is shock focused and her defining mechanic is her spear mobility. The developers described her as being able to throw her spear and then teleport to it, which lines up with the gameplay footage that we've seen. On that note though, the devs do currently plan to add 4 playable characters this year in total. Ryza is planned for October, then Jerome, Veronica and Logan plan to arrive together in a December update. And yes, the 4 characters planned for this this year are confirmed, all of course to be free too. The devs also said that the new quests being added through this year are also expected to be free, but one detail I'd like to highlight here is that this does not mean that every single one of these 4 characters was confirmed to therefore receive a separate hero quest this year, as something like Othello's hero quest and Ryza's hero quest were specifically discussed, while the other 3 December characters themselves weren't necessarily confirmed for said quest. As for monetization this year, the devs did confirm that costumes are likely to be the main paid DLC content, and these characters are also connected directly into the new wave of story content. Now, the story here is continuing, but there are also 2 different timelines here. Around Ryza's October release, the devs were planning to add Othello's hero quest, which should resolve some of the remaining plot threads around Orbis. Ryza's own hero quest, though, is planned for December, alongside the other 3 new characters, and that update is supposed to wrap up most of the first world story. The much bigger story expansion, though, is the Sky Islands. The devs specifically addressed the questions around whether the Sky Islands were coming in December and whether the expansion would be free, but based on what they said in the live stream, neither the release structure nor whether it's free or paid has been finalized yet. The current target for the Sky Islands story, though, is the second half of next year, and even the final scope still isn't locked down. Their current expectation is that Othello and Ryza stories will resolve a lot of the current threads again, while the Sky Islands will resolve most of the true dragon plot threads. So for now, the safest way to treat the Sky Islands is as a major expansion target for next year, with several details still being undecided. Now, the next thing that the devs were apparently surprised by was how quickly some of the players finished the content that they originally considered endgame. Because of this, they're preparing new Tower of Trial floors, higher difficulty options for hunts and raids, and a new challenge-style piece of content that's supposed to sit above the current Nightmare difficulty. The current target for that harder content challenge is around October, with the stream repeatedly pointing towards the middle of the month. They also said they're internally looking at an even harder hunt-style mode, but combat wasn't the only thing that they addressed here either. English dubbing was also something that they tried to actively make happen, and English is their first priority because it has the highest demand, and the team is currently budgeting for it, looking at dubbing studios, estimating how many actors they need, and figuring out the production timeline. Their target is December again, but the devs are very clear that December is a goal, not a promise. Recording hasn't even started yet, for that matter. Before they record, though, they also want to improve the quality and naturalness of the English text so that the dub can work from better material, but if the English dub goes well, other languages are being considered too, though there is no confirmed schedule for other languages. If the game keeps expanding globally, though, consoles are naturally the next platform question. For console players, PlayStation is currently the first platform that they want to pursue. Xbox is lower priority, and the devs said that because Hound 13 is still a relatively new studio, Nintendo has been very difficult for them to approach, so PlayStation is likely the first console that they'll be releasing. That said, don't treat this as a confirmed PS5 release yet, as later in the stream they directly said that the PlayStation version is still at the stage where they're just looking into it. There is no release date and no finalized launch plan yet. Next, however, let's actually talk about costumes, as this was a huge topic during the stream. The 3 swimsuit costumes have sold around 100,000 copies combined, which is absolutely insane, by the way, but they also explained why costumes can't just be pumped out every week. A single costume takes about 2 to 3 months to make, and for upcoming outfits, they said the second seasonal costume is expected to be bunny girl themed, and Callian is the character they specifically mentioned as likely getting a bunny girl costume rather than a swimsuit. Othello is getting a musician or bard style outfit, and they're also considering making his weapon transform into something like a guitar. That weapon transformation is still an idea though, not a guaranteed final feature. They also showed work in progress Reyna and Eileen costumes with a similar Orbis style theme, but these were tentatively discussed for around early October, though the designs shown on stream are obviously not final. Costumes are cosmetic, but a lot of the paid familiar discussion also gets into the more important question of DLC affecting gameplay. Now, moving along, they also mentioned said paid familiars, which is very important because some of them do provide exploration advantages even though they aren't technically direct combat buffs. The devs acknowledged the concern and said they don't want future DLC to feel like it meaningfully affects game performance or forces a purchase, but because people have already bought the existing DLC, they don't want to suddenly remove these effects in the short term. Long term though, they're considering a system where players who don't buy the DLC could eventually unlock these kinds of effects through gameplay, even if it takes more effort. They specifically rejected simply giving one familiar's useful exploration effect to every familiar right now, because that could again make the deluxe content feel mandatory. The devs also spent some time explaining how they currently view mods. They don't recommend using them because mods can make the game unstable and cause crashes, but at the same time, their comments suggested that they aren't just trying to punish random single-player mods. Their current intention appears to be tolerating mods as long as they don't affect other players, and they also mentioned reviewing whether Steam Workshop support is possible, although official Workshop support hasn't been decided yet. The devs were more cautious, of course, though, about mods that affect multiplayer, monetization, or create an unfair experience for other players. So if you use mods, the safest interpretation of the stream is to keep them away from anything that could affect other players or paid content. From this point though, the stream moved into some actually surprisingly useful explanations about how they want players to build characters. To start though, there was a pretty useful explanation of the gear system that they provided. Someone asked why DragonSword has 2-piece and 3-piece set bonuses instead of a full 5, and the response response was that this was completely intentional. The devs do want you to combine two different sets and choose the bonuses that fit your build, and they felt specifically that adding a 5-piece bonus would simply push everyone too hard towards completing one single set and reduce build freedom. But on that note, we move now to one of the most interesting comments if you're actually optimizing endgame gear. The devs actually directly acknowledged that defense ignore set effects are extremely effective in certain content, and from their comments right now, they aren't looking to rush out a direct numerical nerf to this set at the moment. Instead, they mentioned that they're considering future content where that set effect may be less efficient. Later in the stream though, they added that some of defense ignore's current strength is intentional, especially against the very endgame bosses, but at the same time, they don't believe that every single build needs to revolve entirely around defense ignore for every piece of content. Long term, if one effect becomes too heavily preferred over the alternatives, that's something that they'd like to adjust and improve. So the main takeaway is that the team is aware of how valuable that defense ignore currently is, and that there's no immediate direct nerf coming, but there's simply, instead of nerfing it, going to release content where defense ignore may be less valuable. They were also very direct about karma progression. When asked about general karma versus exclusive karma, the devs described the general karma as a bridge on the way towards exclusive ones. This of course means that exclusive karma is the category they currently intend players to work towards long term, but they also said that every character's exclusive karma can ultimately be fully transcended through content such as the Tower of Trials and Hero quests. That doesn't necessarily prove that every exclusive karma will be mathematically best in slot in every build, but it does tell us what the intended progression path currently is. As for character balance, there's actually no immediate wave of nerfs or buffs planned. The devs said that they want more data before making said decisions, and they also don't currently think the max potential of different teams is separated by an enormous amount, especially because different bosses have different weaknesses, and different teams are still clearing the game's endgame content. They also said that this is something that they can adjust over a longer period, but there's no emergency meta overhaul planned currently. As for open world co-op, this is actually something that the devs genuinely want, but unfortunately this is a long-term goal rather than a feature that they can promise soon. They said that the amount of work required is much larger than people might expect, and PvP on the other hand is currently not planned at all because the devs don't think it would really fit the sort of game that DragonSword is supposed to be. On that note, they also mentioned that they tested 4-player raids internally, but felt that the fights became too chaotic and forced too much status effect coordination, which made the combat less enjoyable. That's why the game was brought down to 3-player raids, and there's currently no plans to increase the player count. The devs also mentioned that they know that the UI still has a very mobile game feel in certain places, and that of course came from the game's earlier development history and from having to prioritize controller support before launch. They do plan to improve this, but again, this is a long-term UI and UX task and not a full interface rework that's about to appear next week. Quest design is another area that they're changing going forward though. They specifically acknowledge that some quests make you travel back and forth far too much, especially in areas without convenient portals or warp points, and with this, future quests are going to avoid this sort of unnecessary backtracking as much as possible. For completionists though, the devs didn't want to simply reveal every treasure chest, regional objective, and puzzle on the map, and their concern here specifically is that if every collectible is permanently shown, exploration starts feeling more like a mandatory checklist. What they are planning though is a better way to help players understand what they already have completed and reduce the amount of aimless searching for whatever is missing. That still isn't a short-term priority though yet, and cooking on that note is also getting smaller quality of life improvements, but I wouldn't call it a full cooking system rework. The devs said that changing the food duration system is difficult because of the current underlying structure, but they are however planning better ways to show ingredient names and have food slot improvements on their list. There are some smaller changes that are worth mentioning though. Housing and fishing are not currently planned because the team wants to spend its limited development time on higher priority features. Gathering yield is being increased. They're considering increasing familiar max stamina as your progression or level increases rather than just improving the stamina regeneration speed. A perfect dodge style mechanic is currently being implemented, though the devs are being careful with it because it can definitely negatively affect combat if it's added badly. Character acquisition animations are also being planned for places like the exchange shop, and because DragonSword is not being treated like a traditional online live service game, they currently don't plan to run the usual rotating in-game events that you'd expect from a gacha or MMO. Their focus instead is on continuing to update and finish the package game itself, kind of similar to that of Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, but put all of this together and the roadmap for the next several months is starting to look much clearer and honestly pretty clean. So yeah, that was basically everything they talked about in 8 hours of the live stream condensed into the things that actually matter. The biggest immediate changes in my opinion are definitely the farming buffs and quality of life updates, then Ryza and the harder endgame content in October, followed by the additional free characters and more story content in December alongside some outfits. After this though, you can look forward to something like the Sky Islands expansion, currently aimed at the second half of next year, and as usual, check out the rest of my guides if you're still working on your builds. Thanks again for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, good night.